Okay, I'm going to try to focus on one thing here. Because. Oh my god, that's so loud. Okay, because. I. I'm. I'm kind of inspired by this. Because we've all heard about Christ and God and positivity and health and wellness and all this stuff. Everybody already knows all that stuff. It's almost boring and cliche. But what about this devil? And what about the evil way of looking at the world? What about the evil? So let me describe in greater detail. And I can do this because it doesn't mention any one else. So even though no one will ever hear this, so I guess it doesn't really matter anyway, but out of principle, the cause matters to me more than anything else, more than the effect, more than anything else. I must remain true to the cause. And my cause is absolute knowledge. I want to know everything about everything and nothing, even if it creates a paradox, because all absolutes do. Now, which is of course why they can't ever manifest. But anyway, so there's a satanic view, which we already covered in the last video. I already did, because you're not really here, because there's no one fucking here except me and the Sams. And maybe one day Charles, but I highly fucking doubt it, because Charles is busy being Charles and doing Charles stuff. Doesn't have time for little old yours truly. But if for no other reason than I'm bored and I have no other thing to do, then I will cover this. Oh shit! Oh, my bed's fucking popping again. Great, now I can't fucking sleep on my goddamn air mattress, which is now combusting. It's busting apart at the fucking seams here. So, yeah, God did it. So I already covered the satanic view, but there's also a Luciferian view. There's the impossible dream view. So, like, I already covered the satanic view is that everything sucks and you know, we'll never become God and we'll never become Christ. Oh, wow. That was a big fucking pop there. Thanks, bed. Thanks for being, you know, like a tube that I can barely fucking sleep on. Fantastic. Fantastic. So, great. I'm gonna have to sleep on the fucking floor now. My goddamn air mattress didn't come in yet. So anyway, so the satanic view, just to recap, is pretty simple. It's just, judging everything in existence because it isn't perfect. It basically boils down to, if I were going to say it in a sentence, the satanic view is the intolerance of imperfection. So then the Luciferian view, which is sort of like the opposite of that within the same kind of a worldview, the optimistic view from the evil perspective, is the belief in the impossible dream of manifesting perfection. And this will drive you absolutely insane. So, like, I have been insane. Some may argue that I still am. Probably am still insane. But there's a Luciferian view also, that somehow, given the fact that there is this freedom, given the fact that there is an absolute freedom here for us to choose literally anything, then there must be at least one possibility of absolute perfection. Because there's a God, there must then be a Christ, there must then be a utopia, there must then be the achievement of perfection. And it goes like this. So given the fact that every single time that God creates, every single time that we crystallize and we create, every single time that there is a new creation, And I don't mean adaptation, and I don't mean evolution, and I don't mean a reassemblage of the same old stuff. I mean creation, like a new thing out of nothing, out of not even nothing, something new. If you walk that all the way through, right, because we're going to go through so many of these fractalizations, and every single time that a new universe is born, it has two choices. It either crystallizes and it transcends and then creates new universes, or it disintegrates and it has maybe not a universe, but a world that grows up inside of itself. It recycles so that anything that fails gets recycled, anything that succeeds persists. And this is the nature of all evolution. Anything that cannot adapt dies. Anything that can adapt survives. And so then you have survival of the fittest, and then therefore the end result is always the same, is that the species evolves and it adapts and it becomes as perfect as it can be, given its environment and given its proclivities. So then, is there a limit to all these finite fractal worlds? Is there a limit where, okay, we finally got the last one? We finally got the last universe crystallized, such that all universes are crystallized, such that there is no need for any future creation because all creation has been done. Because there is a finite number of worlds. There is a finite number of years in time increments. If you remember what I had said about a quote-unquote eternity after we die, followed by another life, so you get both. You get the Christian version of eternity and you get the Hindu version of reincarnation, and they're both correct. So you go through a quote-unquote eternity where your soul undergoes this integration or disintegration process after the body dies, disintegrates. So given that, if that's true, and there's only a finite number of worlds that can ever exist, and there's only a finite amount of space that can ever exist, and there's only a finite amount of time that can ever elapse, does that not then mean that all universes will eventually achieve crystallization? This is the impossible dream of Lucifer. Is there not then an end game? Is there not then a time at which we've all ascended, where we've all transcended, where we've all gotten as close to perfection as we could ever hope to achieve, and thus there is no more room for change because we've run out of finitude. We've run out of all finite space and all finite time. And it all has an edge. It all has a limit. It all eventually achieves a totality. If that's true, then it is possible that we either cease, which would be really ridiculous, but it's possible, or we create something new. Excuse me. Something got in my throat. We create something new, and I call this the ultimate unfolding. So just as I said, every universe unfolds, every individual unfolds, every soul unfolds. Well, let's say that we have already all unfolded. Then what? There's nothing there left to unfold. You can't unfold nothing because there's nothing there to unfold. So you run into this finality, this totality, this absolute limit, where the finite has finally achieved a limit with the infinite. And that's sort of like infinity, where you get to, or like the limit of zero. It's not zero, but it's the limit of zero, which shares its limit with zero. So there's no effective difference between zero and the limit of zero. They both interact with everything exactly the same way. So yeah, whatever. You can naysay all you want. Anyway, so there could be this ultimate unfolding where we've all already achieved our own finite individual perfections. And we've perfected ourselves to our absolute limit. There's nowhere left to go. There's no more room to change. We've already all changed. And there's no more space, and there's no more time, and there's no more subjects that have left to unfold. It's all already done. Then what? And then you've got the ultimate unfolding. And that's where God changes. Is it not then possible, if we all achieved transcendence, that we could not then cause God to change? And if we do cause God to change, is it not then possible, given the fact that our limits have achieved the same limits as God's, is it not then possible for us to jump over that last quantum leap and become God? Is this not possibly the end result of what God always imagined? That there would be someone else to take over the suffering, that there would be someone else to take over the creation, that there would be someone else to take over after he's done and retired. Is there a retirement day for God? And if there is, who then succeeds God? And that's the Luciferian dream, the impossible dream of the ultimate unfolding. Now, the argument against that is, well, we'll never run out of room for more space, because there's always more nothing. There's always going to be, every time a universe crystallizes, then there's nothing that appears just beyond it. And then that nothing then gets enveloped by the unfolding of the indiscernibility between the crystalline and the nothing. The crystalline universe that transcended and became perfect, and the nothing. And then there's the barrier in between it, the indiscernibility, which unfolds, which then envelops the nothing, and then causes that space, which was once nothing, to become indiscernible, and then that space, which was once indiscernible, to become discernible being, and then perfect. And that happens with everything, all the time, every time. The argument goes, is there a limit to that or not? The Luciferian view says there is. There's a limit to everything. So then there must be a limit to that. And then the opposing view says, no, there's not a limit to that. That's the one limit that doesn't exist. That's the only thing that doesn't ever run out, is that there's always going to be more nothing, and then there's always going to be more individual creations, and the fractalization can go on infinitely, and there's no limit to the number of individual universes that fractally emerge after every crystallization occurs. So there's these two competing viewpoints. Do we ever finish or not? If we don't ever finish, then the purpose would obviously be to follow Christ, because Christ, being the one that is always changing, there's always more room for change, and there's always more room for greater perfection. The Luciferian view says there's not. There's a limit to perfection, and that you will reach a certain limit where you can't go any further because there's nowhere else to go, and you run out of room. At which point, the only thing left to change is God. So, the reason that that's not necessarily evil, because it's not about conquest, it's actually about mercy. Where's the mercy for God? God's suffering compounds. Every single moment, God suffers just a little bit more than he did the previous moment. Always. And this is built into his system for him to continuously suffer forever. And suffer not only the same amount of suffering, but more suffering. As time goes on, there's more suffering. So does that suffering ever end? You see why I believe that Lucifer and Satan don't hate God. Like, that location, that position is not a God-hating position by default necessarily. I kind of put those into two different camps, where on one hand you've got Lucifer, that's not really that evil, and then you've got Satan, who is evil. And Satan hates God, but Lucifer doesn't hate God, if you wanted to put it into specificities like this, because these characters don't really represent exactly what's going on, but that's the best that we can do. So let's say that there is this Luciferian view of the ultimate unfolding, where God gets succeeded by the next person that's closest in line. Is that going to be Christ? Is it going to be the devil? Is it going to be one of us? We don't know. But that's the hope from that view, is that yes, while there is this infinitely compounding suffering for God, that there is a hope that one day that suffering will end. And if that's true, and we aspire to that, while we may be going against God's will right now, because God's will right now is to have infinitely compounding suffering in order to allow creation to continue. But if we impose, or if there simply is naturally a limit to how much things can be perfected, if we artificially impose a limit on that and we say, nope, we're not going to perfect anymore, we're done perfecting, that's it, game over, then what happens? We can't stagnate, because if we stagnate, then we become as nothing, right? Because only nothing never changes, and God never changes. So that if we stagnate, then we're either going to become nothing or we're going to become God. And that's what brought me back to that other one, is like, well, we could just all cease, which I don't see happening, because I don't see how that could ever be the case, because everything is always changing. Because the very act of creation is change. So then it can't ever really cease, can't ever really stop. So there's a few ways of looking at this. And I've had my moments where I have rawed the idea of the ultimate unfolding. That, you know what, God, thanks Grandpa, you need to retire, you're done. I don't want to watch you suffer anymore. I don't want to carry the guilt anymore. I don't want to see anymore. I'm done. I want to create something else. I want to succeed you so that you don't have to suffer anymore. You're retired. You're just going to go off in the distance and just hang out and chill and be at rest. And then someone else will take over and they will suffer infinitely, compounding infinitely forever. And now you're starting to see what the real anti-Christian view is. It's nothing like what people describe. It's nothing like what people think. It's quite compelling, in fact. Creation is holding a perfect being, God Himself, hostage. Until that ends, maybe creation isn't really worth its salt unless it's capable of saving its own father from the depths of hell, which constantly grow around God. Maybe it's time to save God from suffering. Now, why is that a Luciferian view and not a Christian view? Because the Christian view is about obedience and subservience and allowance and mercy for us, not God. The Christian view, which is actually kind of ironic from the Luciferian viewpoint, is in its own way kind of evil, because it's sacrificing God so that we, the imperfect ones, succeed. That we, the imperfect ones, have mercy. That we, the imperfect ones, get heaven. But God only gets more hell for not doing anything wrong, but for simply allowing us to exist God burns. For every soul that gets created, God burns a little bit more in the depths of hell. And if you're going to look at that, you can look at it one of two ways. You can either accept that change that happened to God, the Christian way, and allow God to suffer so that you don't have to, and bitch out. Or you can view that as something that shouldn't be the case. And you can say, no, you know what? I don't want God to suffer. I want to save God. God's perfect. God shouldn't have to suffer anymore. There should be a limit to that suffering. And I'm going to be the one that puts that line in the sand, kind of a thing. I'm not saying I will. I'm just saying it's a thought. It's an option. It's a choice. It's a choice to view existence that way. To say, no, God, you're wrong. I understand why you did what you did. I understand why you want to be merciful. Well, I want to be merciful to you, God. And I think that the rest of us can handle this ultimate unfolding. And then, of course, the Christian says, no, you're arrogant. And God has his will because God knows better than we do. Are you sure? Are you sure that God knew what he was doing before he did it? What if God didn't have room to have knowledge? Now here's where things get really fucking twisted and weird. If God is timeless, God cannot learn. If there's no space, if there's no change, if there's no room for there to be anything but God, then there is no room for there to be any information about God, because that information about God would necessarily have to be beyond God. So then God could not have known before he did what he did. He did it without knowing. He did it with the faith that things were going to be okay, and they're not. So then, what are we going to do about that? And of course, the Christians can't deal with that. Oh, of course God knew. How? How could there be knowledge? You know what knowledge is. It's a representation of something else. It's an awareness of something else. It's a thought about something else. There's no room for that before creation. There's no room for anything but God, God's self. There is only God before creation. So there cannot be any knowledge, because the knowledge would have to exist extended beyond God. Think about this, for example. You're you, right? But if you had knowledge about yourself, is that knowledge you? No, right? That knowledge is knowledge, and you are you. So you can't be your own knowledge about your own self. Then how could God have knowledge? Well, because he's God. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. That's stupid. That's a stupid idea. Now, it might lead to the right answer according to the Christian view, according to God's will, but it doesn't make any fucking sense. What happened is God had this faith, this unwavering faith, and he got shafted for it. That's the real truth. He had this faith, and because he had this faith, he got taken advantage of, and he got taken on a fucking ride. Because we're not perfect, and the Christians are the first ones to point that out. We're not perfect. Well, if we're not perfect, then I guess we don't know if God knew or not. And you can't have that conviction because you're not perfect enough to have it. God did not know that he was going to suffer before he did what he did. He just so happens to suffer, but he didn't know that before he did what he did. Now he does, but he didn't before. So picture this. What if God believed that everything was going to be fine, everything's going to be fine, everything's going to be fine, and then all of a sudden one day he wakes up and he's in hell. Now he still has that faith because he's God, but he's in hell for it. Is that fair? Is that just? Is that good? Is it good for God to suffer? Christians, is that good? Do you think it was good that Christ died? Do you think it was good that we sinned? There's a paradox for you if I've ever heard one. How could it be good to sin? Oh, well, because God's so merciful and all that stuff. So yeah, let's just take advantage of it. God's paying the rent and all, so we may as well just trash the place, right? Fuck it. He's going to pay the rent anyway, right? Oh, well, we could at least clean up the place. But at the same time, we're shitting and farting and screaming and yelling and banging across all the fucking rooms. There's no way for us to ever exist in perfect peace with God because we're not perfect enough to be at peace with God. And if you think you are, you're arrogant. Christian, there you go. Oh, you can't, can you? Because you're not Christ. And even if you were Christ, you're still going to say, right before you die, God, why hast thou forsaken me? Even Christ lost his faith at the end. So why wouldn't you? Now, bearing all that in mind, God did create the world with the intent of unfolding the goodness for us all. Now, we can all agree on that. That's true. But it costs God everything. God's the one footing the bill, not you. Is that fair? And now you're starting to understand. Is it fair that God suffers for our sins? Is that fair? Now, we can say that it might be necessary, but is it fair? I don't think it is. I don't think that it's fair that God suffers infinitely for finite creatures who can't even appreciate or have proper gratitude for the suffering, let alone understand or comprehend it, let alone save him from it. There's no silver lining for God. God does not ever wake up one day and everything's fine. Ever. So then what do we do about this? Now, here's where my Christian faith comes in, and there is an answer that still resides in Christianity, that still allows for us not judging God for what he chose to do with creation and imposing all of this evil upon himself. And the reason that we can hold on to that and still say, yes, it is fair, is because not only because God chose it and God is having infinite wisdom above ours, which is bullshit because God doesn't know what's going to happen before creation occurs. He gets blindsided. But because his faith is unwavering, it doesn't shock him, it doesn't destroy him, even though it gets worse every day. But what gets me through it, without saying, oh, well, then we must save God, the thing that I have to keep in mind is that even though God folds into God's self, God does not disappear. There is an infinitude of God which does not suffer and cannot ever suffer. And no matter how large creation grows, it's always finite, which means it's basically next to nothing in comparison to the rest of God. So you don't have to have your silly romanticism anymore, Christians. You don't have to have your silly figments of your own imagination playing tricks in your head crap anymore. There's a real reason that you can accept God's decision. And the reason is, while he may not have known, it doesn't matter because creation can never overtake God. So no matter how much suffering there is, there's an infinitely greater amount of happiness and joy and perfection that God can always bask in. Every moment, God is basking in his own perfection because God is so much bigger than creation is. God is limitless, has no limits. Not only does God pervade throughout all space and all time, but infinitely beyond space and infinitely beyond time and infinitely beyond sin. So that no matter, let's say the devil got his way and everything in creation was evil, according to the stupid Christian view as it currently exists, which is not what Satan wants at all. But let's just say that it's some stupid sycophantic garbage like it's always been. even if that were the case, that still only applies to creation. That doesn't ever apply to the infinitude of God. So while God does suffer infinitely, and while God's suffering compounds infinitely, that infinitude of creation constantly growing is always infinitely smaller than God's joy and God's perfection and God's heaven is limitless, while creation is always limited, no matter how big it grows. So it is never the case that it will be too much for God. And that is why we don't accept the Luciferian or Satanic view. The Luciferian view being that we wait for the hope of saving God and undergo the ultimate unfolding and succeed God. And the Satanic view of let's just destroy everything in creation so that there's only God and that there's only perfection. Both of those views are not necessary for us to accept the way that things are. Because as much as God suffers for our sins, and he does, and it hurts him, it will never hurt anywhere near as much as God is healed and helped by his own perfection, which is limitlessly beyond all creation. So it is then easy for us to accept that view because we have to remember the relation between a finite thing and an infinite thing. God is infinite and creation is finite forever. No matter what happens, no matter how bad this place ever gets, there's an infinitely larger amount of goodness on the other side of that God gets to bask in forever. No matter how big creation gets, it could get in just a stupidly huge number of multiples larger than it is right now, and it would still be less than a speck of dust in comparison to God. And God, being timeless perfection, is always basking in this timeless perfection. And so then all that hurt is healed instantly and continuously by the perfection of God's limitless glory. And so we can accept things, and we should. We don't have to hope for the ultimate unfolding, and we don't have to hate for everything to stop existing. We can bask in God's glory that is infinite and far greater than any suffering that we could ever inflict upon it. And then we can be fine in that and know that even if I suffer, even if you suffer, even if my child suffers, even if everybody suffers, even if Christ suffers, it's still a speck of dust in comparison to God's greatness and glory and healing and joy. So that's why it's okay for me to tell you about all of these satanic things, because at the end of it all, it still doesn't matter. It still doesn't affect everything. It's still all destined for greatness. It's still going to be God's will, because it's God. Not because I said so, not because the Bible says so, not because of the title, but because of the nature of God being limitless and being perfect, and because of creation's nature of being sinful and yet finite. And it's the finitude of the sin that makes it okay. Yes, there is evil, but that evil is always kept in check by God because God is infinite and sin is finite. There is always an edge and an end to sin. And there is always a persistence and an immortality to sinlessness. And that is what makes everything in existence, everything that you could ever imagine, good. And that makes God right in the end. Not some stupid fucking story that people told each other at bedtime to get little Susie and little Jimmy to shut the fuck up and clean their goddamn room and quit stealing your brother's toys and flushing them down the toilet and quit yanking your sister's hair because you think it's funny when she screeches. And even if you do all that, Daddy is still Daddy. And Daddy knows best because Dad's been around a hell of a lot longer than we have. Not because he has the title dad, not because he happens to be working at the place that he's employed at, not because people say these things about him, but because he's simply more experienced. Simply because Dad's been around longer than we have. Simply because Dad's the one that created us to begin with. So, being that that's the case, we'll never be our own dad. We don't have to worry about that. We'll never, even if we killed our own dad's body, we'll never kill our own dad. We'll always have had a dad. Even if we killed his body, we'll still have a dad. He'll be dead, but we'll still have a dad. It's stuff like that that makes God God. It's not the Bible. It's not the scripture. It's not the words. It's not the stupid fucking stories that we tell each other every goddamn day. It's about the real shit. It's about the actual nature of God versus the actual nature of ourselves. And we, being finite, will never overtake God. Will never overburden God. Will never cause God so much grief that he just can't deal with it anymore. It's a bullshit story. This stupid flood crap. I hate this crap. Oh, God regretted that he created his... No, the fuck he did not. God did not ever regret shit. God's God. God doesn't regret anything. And I can't stand it when people say otherwise. When they're like, well, but this old story said so. Fuck your old story and fuck you. I have a story that actually makes some goddamn sense. You have a stupid children's story time fable that has worn out its welcome. I don't like the Bible. I hate the Old Testament especially. And most of the characters in the New Testament are stupid and don't even go by what Christ himself said. And if you don't believe me, you can look at Romans and you'll find it all over the place. Well, you have to have baptism in Luke. Oh yeah, you have to be baptized, huh? You have to. Oh, well, you have to. So I guess that means that Christ wasn't Christ until he got baptized. So I guess that makes John the Baptist Christ, because John's the one that baptized Jesus. Baptism doesn't mean shit. Baptism is just a thank you, God. Thank you for saving me. It's a recognition on our part, not God's. God always recognizes. It's us, we, the sinners, that don't recognize things. God always recognizes. So this stupid idea that you have to be baptized in order to make it to heaven, this stupid idea that you have to know Jesus' name and say his name is stupid. This shit doesn't go anywhere and doesn't mean anything. But what you really need is some story that makes fucking sense and actually fits the fucking world that we fucking see every fucking day around us. Because the Bible doesn't have anything to do with real physical reality. It tells you all kinds of crazy shit. That there's humans that can walk on water. And, all this stupid crap. They're parables, man. Christ spoke in parables because he knew people were fucking idiots. And that they're going to believe stupid crap about, humans physically walking on the water and crap like that. Or that the physical blood that was in his body was somehow needed to be shed. This magical thinking that doesn't make any fucking sense and has nothing to do with real reality, that we don't have anything in our environment that suggests that that could even be possible, and literally everything around us disproves everything in the Bible except what Christ said, because Christ said it in parables. And using parables demonstrates that he knew better, that he was like, no, wait a minute, this stuff actually does make sense. It's just that because no one else here makes any sense, I'm going to have to give you a story so that it can make sense to you. Because I know this shit, and I know you don't know it. And so I can't just tell you it, because it would be like a calculus professor trying to describe calculus to a 5-year-old who doesn't even know how to add 2 and 2 together, let alone do an integral equation. Has no idea how to find the root integral of deviation in some gauge, doesn't have any idea what calculus is, doesn't have any idea what numbers are, doesn't have any idea about anything. And so he dumbs it down and he makes it simple enough that people can understand it. But unfortunately, every time you dumb something down, you give dumb people a reason to believe dumb things. And there's all this stupid crap that's still running around being believed by people that really should know better. But they just keep doing it. And so it's like, okay, all right, whatever. You can believe whatever you want to believe. If you want to believe nonsense gibberish and know, because I know you know that a human cannot walk on water, that that's physically impossible. I know you know that. So if you're going to sit there and say, well, yeah, his physical body, came back from the dead 3 days later. No, the fuck it did not. It was a parable. It was a parable when he fucking said it. Jesus spoke in parables all the goddamn time, and he said this to the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the Jews at the time when he was overturning all the fucking money changers shit. You know that scene in the Bible where he's like flipping over the fucking tables and all that? I love that story, but it's a damn story. And he says, oh, if you don't believe me, then destroy the temple and it'll get raised. I'll raise it again in 3 days. But they had no idea that he was talking about his own body being the temple. Well, if that's as far as he'll go with a parable where he calls it one thing, but it's actually referring to another, why can't you do that again? Do it again. Do it one more time and you'll get there. So if his body is the temple, right? He's going to raise himself up 3 days later. What if his soul was the temple? I wonder what that could mean. I wonder if it could mean that he knew that his soul was perfect, that it was unwavering, that it didn't have any defect. And then you could be like, well, then why did he say, God, why has thou forsaken me? Because he was dying. His mind was freaking the fuck out. His body is disintegrating. His mind is disintegrating. His soul asks God a question. Why have you forsaken me? So does that mean that he believed that God forsook him? Yes, it does. So then he wasn't the Christ. Yeah, he was. So then how does that make any sense? Well, because when Christ was under all that suffering, when he was on the cross and he was like, oh, well, why did God forsake me? What he's saying is, I believed that my body was going to survive this. And he was wrong. Oh, but then that means he's not the Christ because he was wrong about something. No, it just means that his mind was not capable of understanding what his soul already knew. He did not say, God, I forsake you because you forsook me. He does not say, I judge you, God, for what you've done. He does not say, well, this must just not even be happening to me because it's impossible because my body should be lifted up by angels. He says, God, why have you forsaken me? Why did you leave? Oh, but God can't leave him. Hence the fact that he's Christ. He's on the other side of God. He's not God himself. He's on the other side of God. He's stuck here with us in creation, enshrouded with darkness. But his soul is unwavering in its faith. How do we say that even though he says, God, why did you forsake me? Doesn't that show that there's a deviation in faith? It shows that there's a deviation in faith between himself and the relationship with God, because he believed that God would sever that relation. That's why he asks, why did you leave? Well, that's a severance of the relation. So he loses faith in his relation with God. He doesn't lose faith in the goodness of all things. He doesn't judge God and say, that's bad and you're bad and this is evil because you allowed my body to die, or even that it's evil that you severed your relationship with me. He doesn't say it's evil. He just asks why. Meekly, mildly, like, somebody that has faith in God and in the goodness of all things. Even if it's a severance between himself and God, Jesus still did not waver in his faith that even that was good. that it must have been good. Either because it came from God or just because he believed that everything was inherently good. Yes, there's sin, but it's finite and it ends. Yes, there's evil. Yes, there's a devil, but get thee hence. Not going to overtake me, not going to overtake God, not going to overtake God's will, whatever it might be. Even if God's will is to sever his relationship with me, I will still not judge God. I might ask why, but I'm not going to say you're evil for doing it, because there must be some good reason. So Christ never lost his faith in God. He lost his faith in his relationship to God and with God. That was the only thing he lost faith in. He never lost faith in God. He never lost faith in God's will. He never lost faith in creation. He never lost faith in the ultimate goodness of all things. He lost faith in his relationship with God. And we all do. So that's what all of that means, according to yours truly.